Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if All for One found Deku first. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sunset bled across the sky in hues of bruised purple and garish orange, a spectacular death of a day that had, in no uncertain terms, murdered a dream. Izuku Midoriya stood on the rooftop, the wind a hollow mourner whistling past his ears. It was cold, a sharp, unseasonable chill that bit through his thin school uniform, but he barely felt it. The only sensation that truly registered was a cavernous, echoing emptiness in his chest where, just a few hours ago, a fierce and desperate hope had lived. "You can't be a hero!" The words were not an echo. They were a permanent resident now, etched onto the inside of his skull. They looped with the calm, pragmatic, and utterly devastating finality of a judge's gavel. All Might, his god, his idol, the very symbol of his life's ambition, had pronounced sentence. He clutched the railing, his knuckles white. Below, the city of Muzurifa hummed with life, a sprawling ecosystem of flashing lights and distant sirens. People were going home, meeting friends, living lives that hadn't been systematically dismantled on a random rooftop. For them, it was just another Tuesday. For him, it was the end of the world. His gaze drifted down to the notebook in his other hand. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The cover was singed at the edges, the paper warped from its brief submersion in the sewer. A starburst of dried sludge marred the stylized drawing of All Might on the cover, a cruel bit of irony. He'd almost lost it to a villain, only to have its purpose, its very soul, eviscerated by the hero it was dedicated to. With trembling fingers he opened it. The pages were stiff. His own spidery, obsessive handwriting stared back at him. Kamiri Woods, weaknesses, strengths, potential support items. Mount Lady, the economic impact of her gigantification, vulnerabilities during transformation. He'd spent thousands of hours on this, pouring every ounce of his analytical mind into these pages, believing, knowing, that this was his path. If he couldn't fight with his fists, he would fight with his mind. He would be the smartest, most prepared hero the world had ever seen. He would prove them all wrong. He flipped to the All Might section. It was the most detailed, of course. 20 pages of fanatical devotion and meticulous observation. Speculations on the source of his power, theories on his fighting style, a frame-by-frame breakdown of his Carolina Smash, from a grainy online video. A double-page spread, drawn with colored pencils when he was 12, depicted All Might saving 100 people from a collapsing building, his smile a sunbeam in the chaos. A single, hot tear fell onto the page, smearing the ink of the word hope. It was all a lie. A child's fantasy. It's not bad to dream, young man. But you need to be realistic. Realistic. The word was a punch to the gut. The reality was that he was a quirkless, useless Deku. A biological dead end in an evolved world. Bakugo had been right all along, his taunts not just cruelty, but fact. All Might had just delivered the peer-reviewed, professionally confirmed version of what Kaken had been screaming at him for a decade. He remembered the steam, the skeletal form, the story of a wound that could not be healed. He had seen the mortality of his god, and in that moment of shared vulnerability, he thought he'd found a connection, a reason. He had poured out his heart, his entire 14 years of pain and yearning, and asked the question that was the very foundation of his being. Can even someone without a quirk be like you? And the symbol of justice, the pillar of their society, had looked at him with pity in his sunken eyes and said no. He'd offered him a different path. A police officer. A doctor. Good, noble professions. But to Izuku, it was like telling a bird it could be a magnificent fish. It wasn't a redirection, it was an amputation. A bitter, broken sound escaped his lips, half sob, half laugh. He sank to his knees, the rough concrete of the roof digging into his uniform. The notebook slipped from his grasp, falling open to a page analyzing Bakugo's quirk. Explosion, incredible versatility. Limited by sweat production. Susceptible to surprise attacks from non-direct angles. Mental state is a major vulnerability. Easily angered. Even now, his brain was doing it. Analyzing. Breaking things down. A useless habit for a useless boy. He remembered Bakugo's words from earlier that day, spat with such casual venom as he'd scorched Izuku's notebook. You know, if you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Just pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life and take a swan dive off the roof of the building. He crawled to the edge and looked down. The cars below were metallic beetles, the people ants. It was so high. A quick drop. A final impact. Maybe Kakin was right. Maybe that was the only way for him to find what he was looking for. No. He couldn't. His mom. The thought of her face, her constant apologies for his quirkless status as if it were her fault, was the only anchor he had left. He couldn't do that to her. But what else was there? Go home? Tell her that his one defining purpose had been declared impossible by the only person whose opinion mattered? Live the rest of his life as a shadow, a footnote in a world of superhumans? The emptiness in his chest yawned wider, threatening to swallow him whole. He was adrift in a cold, starless ocean, and his lighthouse had just gone dark. That's when he heard it. Not a shout, or a siren, or any of the usual city noises. It was the sound of a car engine so smooth and so quiet it was more a presence than a sound. He glanced down into the alley that ran alongside the building. There, pulled up against the curb, was a car. It was long, black, and impossibly sleek, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in a grimy back alley. Its finish seemed to drink the dying light of the sunset, reflecting nothing. It was a patch of mobile darkness. Its windows were tinted to an absolute, impenetrable black. It radiated an aura of quiet, immense power. He stared, confused. It was parked directly below him. As if waiting. Then, a man stepped out of the driver's side door. He was tall and slender, dressed in an immaculate black suit and waistcoat, like a high-end bartender. But his head and neck were made of a swirling, dark purple mist, punctuated by two glowing yellow slits that resembled eyes. The sight was so bizarre, so utterly alien, that Izuku's analytical mind momentarily kicked in, overriding his despair. A warp quirk? Transportation-based? Emitter type, clearly. The mist seems to be his body. Is it gaseous or particulate? The misty figure looked up, his yellow eyes fixing on Izuku with an unnerving precision. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture. He just stood there, a silent, surreal sentinel. Then, a soft, polite voice drifted up, carried on the wind with perfect clarity. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku flinched back from the ledge as if he'd been struck. How did this thing know his name? His heart, which had been a dead weight in his chest, began to hammer against his ribs with a panicked, frantic rhythm. A villain? Had the sludge villain's associates come looking for him? There is no need for alarm. The voice continued, smooth and unnaturally calm. I am here on behalf of my master. He wishes to speak with you. Why your master? Izuku stammered, his voice cracking. He stayed low, peering over the edge of the roof, his body screaming at him to run. But where? And why? What could a villain possibly want with him? The man in the mist, Kurojairi, gestured gracefully towards the car's rear passenger door. He has taken a great interest in you. He saw what transpired earlier today, both with the sludge villain, and with All Might. The name hit Izuku like a physical blow. They knew. This stranger, this villain, knew about his conversation. About his humiliation. The shame was so intense it was nauseating. He wanted the concrete to open up and swallow him. As his mind reeled, another voice joined the first. It didn't come from the man of mist, but from a small, discreet speaker mounted near the car's side mirror. The audio quality was perfect, studio grade, carrying none of the tinny distortion of a typical speakerphone. The voice it carried was mesmerizing. It was a man's voice, deep and resonant, laced with a calm, intellectual authority. It was the voice of a professor, a statesman, a king. It was serene and patient, yet beneath the surface, Izuku could feel an ancient, terrifying power, like the deep, silent rumble of the earth before a quake. Izuku Midoriya. The voice began, and the very sound of it seemed to settle the chaotic winds. Forgive the unorthodox introduction. My associate is named Kurojairi. My own name is not important at this moment. What is important is you. Izuku couldn't speak. He was frozen, A rabbit in the headlights of that impossibly black car. I understand you are in a great deal of pain, the voice continued, and there was a note of genuine sympathy in it that cut through Izuku's fear. It was a stark contrast to the pity he'd seen in All Might's eyes. This wasn't pity. It was understanding. You have just been told that your entire existence is a mistake, that your dream is a foolish fantasy. You were told this by the one man you trusted to tell you otherwise. That is a heavy burden for any soul to bear. Who are you? Izuku finally managed, his voice a raw whisper. A soft, low chuckle came through the speaker. It wasn't mocking. It was warm, almost fatherly. I am a man who appreciates potential where he sees it. And I see it in you, young man. I see it in abundance. This had to be a trick. A cruel joke. Potential? I'm quirkless. I'm a Deku. I have nothing. Oh, but that is where you, and this broken society, are so very wrong, the voice said, its tone shifting from gentle sympathy to a sharper, more focused intensity. I was not observing your quirk, or lack thereof. I was observing your character. I watched the heroes, those paragons of justice, stand by and do nothing as that young blonde boy suffocated. They waited for someone with the right quirk. They were paralyzed by procedure and public image. The voice paused, letting the words sink in. But you, a quirkless child, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, you ran in. You acted. You did not hesitate. In that moment, with no power to your name, you were more of a hero than any of the licensed professionals gathered on that street. Do you not see the beautiful, tragic irony in that? Izuku's breath hitched. No one had ever described his actions that way. The heroes had chastised him. All Might had called him foolish. But this voice called him a hero. It was the validation he had been starving for his entire life. Your mind as well, the voice continued, its tone becoming almost admiring. I am aware of your analytical abilities. Your notebooks. The way you deconstruct quirks, strategies, and support items. It is a brilliant, tactical intellect. In a wiser world, a mind like yours would be celebrated, nurtured. But in this one, it is overlooked because you lack a flashy, physical ability. They have mistaken the vessel for the contents, and in doing so, they are prepared to cast aside a treasure. Tears were streaming down Izuku's face again, but these were different. They weren't born of despair, but of a confusing, overwhelming sense of being seen. This stranger, this voice from the shadows, understood him better than anyone ever had. This society is a sham, Izuku Midoriya, the voice said, the warmth hardening into a core of cold, tempered steel. It is a lottery. You are judged not by your heart, your courage, or your intelligence, but by the random chance of your birth. Heroes are no longer saviors. They are celebrities, chasing ratings and endorsement deals. They maintain a fragile, unjust status quo, propped up by a single, smiling pillar who is, himself, a walking contradiction. The thinly veiled reference to All Might was unmistakable. He is a symbol, yes, the voice mused. But a symbol of what? Of an ideal no one can realistically achieve? He creates a culture of dependence. He allows the system to stagnate, to rot from the inside, because as long as he is there to punch the biggest threat, no one has to look too closely at the cracks forming in the foundation. He is not a cure, child. He is a bandage on a festering wound. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking at the nascent doubts that All Might's revelation had planted in Izuku's heart. He'd seen the man's weakness. He'd heard his pragmatic, tired words. He was just a man. A powerful man, yes, but a man who had told Izuku to give up. This voice was offering a different perspective, a larger truth that resonated with the unfairness he had experienced his whole life. I offer you a different path, the voice said, its tone softening once more, becoming seductive, inviting. A chance to do what you were born to do, not to become another cog in their broken machine, but to help build a new, better world. A world where people are judged by their worth, not their quirks. A world of true equality. I don't understand, Izuku whispered, his mind spinning. You want to be a hero. You want to save people. I can give you the means to do so on a scale you cannot possibly imagine, the voice promised. But to fix a flawed system, you cannot work within its rules. You must stand outside of it. You must be willing to make the hard choices that the so-called heroes are too afraid, or too vain, to make. The speaker fell silent. Kurojiiri, who had been standing as still as a statue, moved. He walked to the forgotten notebook lying on the ground in the alley. It had fallen from the roof when Izuku had collapsed. With a delicate, almost reverent motion, he picked it up. He opened it, his misty head tilting as if he were reading the singed pages. Your analysis of Endeavor's psychological weaknesses is particularly astute, the voice from the car remarked, sending a fresh jolt of shock through Izuku. You see the flaws in them all, don't you? You just haven't allowed yourself to accept the conclusion. What do you want from me? Izuku asked, the question trembling in the air. I want to give you what you deserve, the voice stated simply. I want to give you a purpose. A place where your mind and heart will not just be valued, but will be essential. And, of course, there was a long, dramatic pause. It felt as if the entire city held its breath. I want to give you a quirk. The world stopped. Izuku's blood ran cold, then hot. A quirk. The one thing he had ever wanted. The key to the locked door of his dreams. Was it possible? He knew about All for One, of course. A boogeyman from the history books. A villain of myth who could steal and grant quirks. But he was supposed to be dead. Defeated by All Might years ago. Could it be? You can't. He stammered. That's impossible. Is it? The voice replied, laced with amusement. Is it any more impossible than a man who can punch the weather into changing? The world is full of impossible things, Izuku Midoriya. You have simply been taught a very narrow version of reality. I can give you power. Not borrowed power, not a cheap imitation, but a power tailored for you. A tool that only someone with your intellect and spirit can wield to its full potential. This was the ultimate temptation. A direct refutation of All Might's verdict. A hand reaching up from the abyss when the heavens had cast him out. He thought of his mother's worried face. He thought of his classmates' sneers. He thought of Bakugo's explosive rage. He thought of All Might's pitying gaze. His entire life had been a series of closed doors, of being told what he couldn't be. And now, here was a voice offering him the key to every single one of them. But it was a villain's offer. The path of darkness. His heart, the heroic heart that had sent him running toward the sludge villain, screamed in protest. But you're a villain, he said, the words tasting like ash. Heroes don't work with villains, the voice let out a long, patient sigh. A doctor who must perform a painful, invasive surgery to remove a cancer, is he a villain to the cells he cuts away? Society is sick, child. It is dying. The cure is not always pleasant, and it is rarely clean. The heroes you worship are content to manage the symptoms. I intend to excise the disease. The question you must ask yourself is not is this the path of a hero, but rather, which path will allow me to save the most people? The logic was twisted, warped, but to his shattered, desperate mind, it was a lifeline. He was being offered a chance to be effective, to make a real difference, not just to be a symbol, to fix the system that had discarded him. He looked down at his own trembling hands. Weak. Quirkless. Empty. The voice from the car spoke one last time, its tone soft, compelling, final. All Might showed you the man behind the curtain and told you to go home. I am showing you the curtain itself and offering you the chance to tear it down. The choice is yours, Izuku Midoriya. Remain an empty vessel, a footnote in a story that will never be written. Or come with me, and let me fill you with the power to become its author. Silence. The wind howled, a lonely, desolate sound. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom of conflict. His dream versus his morality. His idol's rejection versus this stranger's acceptance. He pushed himself to his feet. His legs felt like lead. He walked to the rooftop access door, his movements stiff, robotic. He descended the stairs, each step an echo in the concrete stairwell, a footfall away from his old life. He emerged into the alley. The air was thick with the smell of refuse and exhaust. The black car was there, a silent monolith. Kurojiiri stood beside the rear door, holding it open. The interior was plush, dark leather, and utterly spotless, a stark contrast to the filth of the alley. It was a portal to another world. Kurojairi was still holding his notebook. He extended it to Izuku. Izuku looked at it. He saw the childish drawings, the naive worship, the frantic scribbles of a boy who believed in a fairy tale. It was the symbol of everything he had been. A relic of a shattered faith. Slowly, deliberately, he shook his head. "I won't be needing that anymore," he said, his voice quiet, but for the first time that day steady. Devoid of tears. Devoid of hope. Filled with something new. Something cold and hard. Kurojairi's yellow eyes seemed to crinkle, a strange approximation of a smile. He didn't drop the book. He simply placed it carefully on top of a nearby dumpster, as if it were an offering at a grave. Izuku Midoriya took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows of his past. He slid into the back seat of the car. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing him in silence and darkness. He couldn't see out of the tinted windows, and he was alone in the back. The engine hummed to life, a near-silent vibration that coursed through the fine leather. As the car pulled away from the curb, smoothly and without a sound, its headlights cut a path into the deepening night. Left behind in the grimy alley, a gust of wind caught the pages of Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. It flipped through entries on dozens of heroes, a veritable encyclopedia of a dying dream. Finally it came to rest, the singed cover lying face down in the dirt, the hopeful, smiling face of All Might hidden from the indifferent stars. The vessel was empty. And it was ready to be filled. The first thing Izuku became aware of was the smell. It was a sharp, sterile scent, a combination of antiseptic and ozone that scrubbed the air clean of any other aroma. It was the smell of a hospital, but colder, lacking the underlying notes of sickness and floral arrangements that clung to civilian medical centers. This was the scent of a laboratory. He was lying on something soft but firm, a medical bed of some kind. A thin, gray blanket was pulled up to his chin. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness and a dull, throbbing ache deep within his bones pushed him back down. His body felt alien, a rented vehicle he didn't quite know how to operate. The room was white. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, all were a seamless, matte white that seemed to absorb sound and light. There were no windows, only panels of soft, indirect light that gave no indication of the time of day. The only other object in the room was a single white chair. The hum of sophisticated machinery was a constant, low thrum in the background, the heartbeat of the facility. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to rise in his throat, but it was sluggish, muted by the fog in his mind. He remembered the car, the voice, the decision. He had chosen this. The thought didn't bring comfort, only a profound and terrifying sense of finality. The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing two figures. The first was Kurojairi, his form a familiar vortex of dark mist in the stark white room. The second was a short, stout man in a pristine white lab coat. He had a thick, bushy mustache, wore large, round spectacles, and had a cherubic, almost grandfatherly face that was completely at odds with the clandestine nature of their location. He was beaming, his eyes twinkling with an unnerving, proprietary excitement. "Ah, he is awake!" "Excellent, excellent!" the man chirped, bustling over to the bed. He held a digital tablet, his fingers dancing across its surface as he scanned the readouts from the monitors attached to Izuku. "Vitals are stable, neurological activity is returning to baseline, minimal cellular rejection." "Oh, you are a marvel, my boy!" "A perfect specimen." Izuku flinched at the man's enthusiastic prodding. Who are you?" "I am Dr. Tsubasa. Or you may call me Dr. Garaki, if you prefer," the man said with a little bow. "I am a humble physician and scientist in our master's service, and I, my dear boy, am the architect of your imminent rebirth. Rebirth." The word echoed the voice from the car. Kurojairi glided to the side of the room, a silent observer. "The master has selected your first gift," he stated, his voice as calm and formal as ever. "Dr. Garaki has prepared you for the procedure. You have been healing from the preparatory regimen for the last 3 days. 3 days. He had lost 3 days. The thought was disorienting. He looked down at his arm and saw the faint pinpricks of 4 lines. They had been working on him while he was unconscious. The emptiness he had felt on the rooftop was now being replaced by a nervous, thrumming energy, a terrifying cocktail of fear and anticipation. Gift? Procedure? Izuku's voice was hoarse. Ah, yes! Dr. Garaki clapped his hands together. Our master is a connoisseur of quirks. He has collected thousands over his long life. But he does not simply bestow them at random. Oh no! That would be crude. It is a science. An art. We must find the right quirk for the right vessel. And you, with your pristine, quirkless biology, you are a blank canvas of unparalleled quality. No messy genetic markers from a pre-existing quirk to interfere with the grafting process. It's simply magnificent. The doctor's clinical glee was deeply unsettling. He was talking about altering Izuku's fundamental biology as if he were discussing a new recipe. The quirk master has chosen for you is a beautiful one. Garaki continued, his eyes gleaming behind his spectacles. It is an emitter type with a stockpiling component. We have designated it kinetic stockpile. A simple name for an elegant function. Your body will become a capacitor, my boy. A battery for physical force. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Every step you take, every punch you block, every impact your body absorbs, a portion of that kinetic energy will be siphoned off and stored within your cells. It will lie dormant, a coiled spring of potential. Then, with a conscious act of will, you can release it. A single, focused burst of incredible strength. A short, impossible burst of speed. The more energy you absorb, the more powerful the release. It is not a quirk of brute force, you see. It is a quirk for the intelligent. For the strategic. It requires patience, observation, and a keen analytical mind to use effectively. It is a quirk, for you. Izuku's mind raced, his analytical instincts kicking in despite his fear. Absorb and release. A reactive power. It would be weak at the start of a fight. I need to endure attacks to build power. Defense becomes offense. The potential for a counterattack would be immense. But what's the limit? Is there a ceiling to how much I can store? Does it dissipate over time? Can I release it from specific parts of my body? As if reading his thoughts, Garaki smiled. So many questions. The sign of a truly brilliant mind. All will be answered in time. For now, we must complete the transfer. The final step. Kurogyari glided forward, and the space beside the bed warped, a swirling gate of purple mist forming in the air. From it, a single, complex-looking syringe emerged, held by a medical drone. The liquid inside was a faint, shimmering gold. This serum contains the synthesized quirk factor, bound to a series of viral agents that will rewrite your DNA on a cellular level. Garaki explained calmly. There will be some discomfort. A fever is to be expected as your body battles and then accommodates the new genetic information. It is the pain of becoming. Izuku stared at the needle, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it. The point of no return. The moment his entire life had been leading to, though not in any way he had ever imagined. He thought of All Might's words. You can't be a hero. He thought of the voice from the car. Let me fill you with the power to become its author. He took a shaky breath, the antiseptic air stinging his lungs, and nodded. He extended his arm. The needle was painless as it went in, but the serum itself felt like liquid fire coursing through his veins. A searing heat spread from his arm throughout his entire body. His muscles seized, and his teeth chattered violently. The world dissolved into a blur of white light, an agonizing sensation. It felt like every cell in his body was being torn apart and rebuilt from the inside out. He heard Garaki's voice, distant and distorted, shouting technical data. He felt a cool, misty presence, presumably Kurogyari, holding him steady. And then, through the pain, he felt something else. A new sensation. A low, deep hum that seemed to emanate from the very marrow of his bones. It was a feeling of potential, a quiet, thrumming reservoir of energy that had never been there before. He had a quirk. He, Izuku Midoriya, had a quirk. The thought was so overwhelming that his consciousness finally gave way, and he collapsed back into the darkness. The next 6 months passed in a disorienting, timeless haze, a meticulously structured crucible designed to break down the boy he was and forge a new weapon in his place. The windowless facility became his entire world. His days were divided into 3 core pillars: physical conditioning, quirk mastery, and philosophical indoctrination. His mornings were spent in a vast, gray training hall that could simulate any environment. His trainer was a silent, masked man named Jiren who communicated only in grunts and gestures, forcing Izuku to anticipate and analyze. The regimen was brutal. He was pushed to the absolute peak of human endurance and beyond. His scrawny, uncoordinated body was slowly, painfully rebuilt. He grew taller, his shoulders broadened, and lean, wiry muscle began to define his frame. Every ache, every bruise, every strained muscle was a reminder of his transformation. It was during this conditioning that he truly began to understand his quirk. At first, it was clumsy. He would try to release the stored energy, and it would fizzle out, a pathetic pop of force that barely made a punching bag sway. Or worse, he would release too much at once, the recoil sending him flying backward, his arms screaming in protest. But his analytical mind, once used for dissecting hero battles, was now his greatest asset. He began a new series of notebooks, the covers a stark, anonymous black. Quirk application and combat logistics. Entry 17. Kinetic stockpile energy dissipation. The stored charge appears to have a half-life of approximately 12 hours. Maintaining a peak charge requires consistent kinetic input. Low-level activity like walking or jogging provides a trickle charge, but significant storage requires direct impact. Hypothesis: a fighting style based on parrying and blocking, absorbing an opponent's momentum, would be the most efficient method of charging during combat. Entry 28. Controlled release. Have isolated the ability to channel the release. By focusing, I can direct the kinetic burst through a single point of contact, a fist, a foot, even a fingertip. A full-body release results in an explosive dash, but is highly inefficient and draining. Precision is key. A small, focused burst to shatter a weak point is more effective than a large, unfocused one. The quirk rewards a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He learned to absorb the impact of landing from great heights, turning a potentially bone-shattering fall into a reservoir of power. He learned to parry blows, letting the force of an attack flow into him, only to return it tenfold. He was not a brawler like Bakugo, all explosive, upfront power. He became a reactive fighter, a patient predator who grew stronger the more his opponent struggled. The feeling was intoxicating. For the first time in his life, he felt powerful. He felt worthy. His afternoons were for study, but not of school subjects. They were spent in a magnificent, dark-wood library, filled with thousands of books on history, political science, sociology, and philosophy. And it was here that he would meet with his true teacher. All for One was never physically present. He appeared on a massive, wall-mounted screen, a dark figure seated in what looked like a life-support throne, his face obscured by a web of pipes and medical equipment. But his voice filled the room, a calm, resonant presence that commanded absolute attention. He treated Izuku not as a subordinate, but as a prized pupil, a brilliant young mind to be molded. "Tell me, Izuku," All for One would say, his voice a smooth baritone. "Why did the Hero Public Safety Commission cover up the Endeavor incident for so many years? The one involving his family, to protect the image of the number 2 hero." Izuku would answer, having been assigned the relevant, and highly classified, reading material. His public approval rating was a key factor in maintaining social stability in the Western prefectures. Admitting he was an abusive monster would have caused mass panic and eroded public trust in heroes as a whole. "Precisely," All for One would affirm, a pleased tone in his voice. "They chose the illusion of stability over the truth. They sacrificed a family for the sake of a symbol. Is that justice? Is that heroism?" They are not protecting society, child. They are curating it. They are gardeners who would rather paint a diseased leaf green than treat the rot at the root. He systematically deconstructed every pillar of the heroic society Izuku had once worshipped. He presented case studies of heroes who had let civilians die due to restrictive rules of engagement. He showed financial records of hero agencies that spend more on marketing and merchandise than on rescue equipment. He explained how the UA Sports Festival was not a showcase of future heroes, but a crass, televised meat market where children were judged and drafted like prize livestock. He never raised his voice. He never ranted like a common villain. He spoke with the calm, irrefutable logic of a scholar, presenting evidence and asking questions, leading Izuku to the conclusions he had predetermined. All might is the linchpin of this entire charade, he explained one afternoon, after Izuku had spent a week studying the economic impact of his debut. He is a brilliant piece of social engineering, a man so powerful, so charismatic, that his very presence suppresses large-scale villainy and, more importantly, suppresses dissent. People are willing to overlook the deep, systemic flaws of their society because they believe that, when things get truly bad, the smiling man will fly in and punch the problem away. He is the ultimate opiate for the masses. Izuku, who had once had All Might posters covering every inch of his bedroom wall, now found himself nodding in agreement. He remembered the skeletal man on the rooftop, the one who spoke of limits and realism. All for One was right. All Might wasn't a god. He was just a man. A man who had built his pedestal on a foundation of lies, and who had kicked Izuku off it because he didn't fit the mold. The resentment, once a fresh, weeping wound, had hardened into a cold, sharp conviction under All for One's careful tutelage. It was during one of these sessions that the subject of his name came up. Izuku Midoriya. All for One mused, the name sounding strange and foreign in the silent library. It is the name of a gentle, hopeful boy who was told he was worthless. It is the name of a victim, and Deku, that is the name your tormentors gave you. A brand they seared onto your soul. Neither of these names is fit for the man you are becoming. A new purpose requires a new identity. This was the same logic Bakugo had used, twisted into a mantra of empowerment. Shed your old skin. You are not a frontal assault. All for One continued. You are not a symbol to be seen by all. Your power is subtle. Your strength lies in your mind, in your ability to appear as one thing while being another entirely. You move unseen, you strike when least expected. You are a distortion in your enemy's perception. What does that suggest to you? Izuku thought for a long moment, his mind sifting through concepts. He thought of his fighting style, of absorbing and redirecting, of being underestimated until the final, decisive blow. He thought of the world All for One described, a world of shadows and half-truths that he would need to navigate. Kajiro, Izuku said, the word feeling strange and new on his tongue. Ah! All for One's voice was rich with approval. The heat haze. A shimmer in the air that distorts what lies beyond it. A phantom. A shadow. An excellent choice. It is who you are now. Say it. Izuku stood up, his posture straighter, his gaze firm. The frightened, tear-stained boy from the rooftop was a ghost, a memory from another life. My name is Kajiro, the declaration echoed in the silent library. In that moment, Izuku Midoriya was well and truly buried. His final pillar of training was isolation. All for One was meticulous in curating his experience. He saw only Kurojiri, Dr. Garaki, his silent trainer, and the televised image of his master. He was given everything he needed: food, clothes, advanced training equipment, access to any information he requested. His new life was a comfortable, intellectually stimulating prison. He knew of the League of Villains. All for One spoke of them, particularly of Tamura Shigaraki. But he did so in a detached, academic way. Tamura is an experiment of a different sort, All for One explained. He is a symbol of this society's failures, a child who was abandoned, ignored, and left to rot by the very heroes who claim to protect the innocent. His rage is pure, a raw, untamed force of nature. He is the sledgehammer. You, Kajiro, are the scalpel. Both are necessary tools to bring about change. This explanation satisfied him, for a time. He was the intellectual, the strategist. Shigaraki was the blunt instrument. It made sense. He had no desire to associate with the kind of crazed, destructive villains he saw on the news. His purpose was higher, more refined. He wasn't a villain, he was a revolutionary. A surgeon for a sick world. One evening, however, a crack appeared in the seamless facade of his new reality. He was in his stark white room, practicing his quirk by absorbing the kinetic energy of a bouncing superball, when a sound echoed from far down the corridor. It was a scream, a raw, agonized sound of pure terror, followed by a sickening, wet crunch, and then, disintegration. He felt a faint tremor through the floor. The scream was cut off abruptly. Silence descended once more, heavier than before. He stood frozen, the ball dropping from his hand and bouncing away with a series of soft thuds. His mind, now honed to a razor's edge, analyzed the sound. It wasn't a training exercise. It was real. It was the sound of someone dying horribly. The next day, during his session with Dr. Garaki, he saw the doctor muttering to himself as he disposed of a large, sealed biohazard bag. Such a waste, Garaki grumbled, not realizing Kajiro was listening. Another failed vessel for the duplicates. The high-end models are so much more stable. Tamura's tantrums are becoming counterproductive to my research. The words sent a chill down Kajiro's spine. Failed vessel? Duplicates? Tamura's tantrums? He didn't ask. He knew better. Asking would reveal he had heard something he shouldn't have. It would show a crack in his own conditioning. Instead, he filed the information away in the deepest recesses of his mind. It was a data point that didn't fit the elegant, sanitized revolution his master had described. It was a hint of something uglier, more chaotic, and more monstrous lurking just beyond the white walls of his curated world. It was the first seed of a conflict he was not yet ready to acknowledge. For now, he pushed it down. He had a purpose. He had an aim. He had power. The final test of his initial training came at the end of the 6 months. He was brought to a cavernous chamber he had never seen before. In the center stood 10 advanced combat androids, modeled after various pro-heroes. Your final exam, Kajiro. All for One's voice boomed from hidden speakers. Do not destroy them. Incapacitate them. Show me your mind, not just your muscle. Kajiro took a deep breath, the low hum of his own potential buzzing beneath his skin. He had a baseline charge from his walk to the chamber. He entered his fighting stance, a low crouch, his eyes scanning the 10 figures. They activated, their optical sensors glowing red. The one modeled after Ingenium dashed forward. Kajiro didn't try to meet it head-on. He sidestepped, letting it rush past, and as it did, he slapped his palm against its back. He didn't release any energy. He simply let the friction and the motion of the slap add a tiny bit more to his store. The Endeavor model unleashed a torrent of plasma. He dove, rolling across the floor, the impacts of his body on the concrete feeding his quirk. He came up behind the Hawks model, which launched a dozen sharp, metallic feathers. He didn't dodge. He raised his arms, letting the projectiles thud into his reinforced forearm guards, each impact a welcome gift of energy. Thud. 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 The hum inside him grew stronger, a rising crescendo. He was a dancer in a field of bullets, weaving and absorbing, his charge growing with every passing second. The heroes he once idolized were now just patterns to be analyzed, attacks to be exploited. He saw their movements not as heroic special moves, but as predictable transfers of kinetic energy. Finally, the all-might android charged, its fist cocked for a simulated Texas smash. Kajiro stood his ground. He had stored enough. The fist came at him, a piston of steel and wiring. At the last possible microsecond, he moved. He didn't block it. He redirected it, placing his palm on the android's wrist and twisting, using its own momentum to spin it off balance. At the same time, he channeled a small, precise burst of kinetic stockpile into his other hand, a fingertip strike aimed at the android's ankle joint. The impact wasn't loud. It was a sharp crack, like a stone hitting ice. The android's ankle shattered. It stumbled, its massive frame crashing to the floor. He flowed through the remaining 9 like a phantom. A focused jab to a knee joint here, a concussive tap to an optical sensor there. He disabled the Mount Lady model by absorbing the force of its stomp and using it to shatter the hydraulic systems in its leg. He used the accumulated energy from a barrage by the Snipe model to deliver a single, supersonic flick to its trigger mechanism, shattering it. He never used more force than was absolutely necessary. It was a brutal, beautiful, and terrifyingly efficient display of combat analysis. A scalpel at work. In less than 2 minutes, all 10 androids were disabled, twitching on the floor in heaps of smoking circuitry. Kajiro stood in the center of the room, breathing steadily, his body thrumming with leftover power. He hadn't even broken a sweat. There was a long silence from the speakers. Then, for the first time, Kajiro heard a sound from his master that wasn't calm or controlled. It was a soft, genuine, and deeply pleased laugh. Magnificent! All for one's voice echoed in the chamber. Absolutely magnificent! You have exceeded all of my projections. Your forging is complete. You are ready, my Kajiro. Kajiro looked down at his own hands. They were steady, calloused, and capable. They were the hands of a stranger. But they were his. I am ready, master, he said, his voice cold and clear. What is my purpose? Your purpose is to observe. All for one replied. Tamura is about to make his public debut. He will lead an assault on the next generation of heroes at UA High School. It is a crude, blunt affair, but a necessary one. You will accompany him. Not to participate, but to watch. To analyze. Gather data on the students, on the teachers, and most importantly, on the symbol of peace when he inevitably arrives. This is your first field test. Show me what you see. UA High School. The place he had once dreamed of attending more than anywhere else in the world. Now, he would go there as an invader. An observer in the ruins of his own dream. He felt a flicker of something, a pang of what might have been loss, but he crushed it. That was Izuku Midoriya's dream. A foolish, childish fantasy. He was Kajiro now. And Kajiro had work to do. The air inside Kurogiri's warp gate was a placid non-space, a silent, swirling void of purple and black that smelled faintly of ozone and distant thunder. It was a disorienting, liminal state that Kajiro had come to associate with the precipice of action. He stood perfectly still within the vortex, his breathing slow and measured, a stark contrast to the figure fidgeting beside him. Tamura Shigaraki was a discordant symphony of nervous energy. He scratched furiously at his neck, the dry rasp of his nails against chapped skin a counterpoint to the gate's low hum. He was muttering to himself, a litany of video game jargon and petulant complaints. This is it, the tutorial level is over. Shigaraki rasped, his crimson eyes wide and manic behind the disembodied hand that served as his mask. Time to meet the final boss. I hope he shows. If he doesn't show, this whole event is just a waste of XP. Kajiro watched him from the corner of his eye, his expression unreadable behind the simple black domino mask that now covered his face. His own attire was practical and subdued, dark gray cargo pants, a black, long-sleeved compression shirt that hugged his new, lean physique, and soft-soled combat boots that made no sound. He was a shadow, designed for infiltration and silence. Shigaraki, with his morbid accessories and jerky movements, was a spectacle. A statement. The scalpel and the sledgehammer, Kajiro recalled his master's words. He felt a profound sense of detachment, of clinical superiority. Shigaraki was not a leader to be followed. He was a variable to be observed. Your instructions are clear, Kajiro. Kurogiri's polite voice cut through Shigaraki's muttering. You are to find a high-yield observation point and remain unseen. Your mission is data acquisition only. You will not engage, you will not interfere. You are master's eyes on this battlefield. I understand, Kurogiri. Kajiro replied, his voice a low monotone. Shigaraki scoffed, his scratching intensifying. Sensei's favorite little pet. He doesn't trust me to handle this, so he sends a spy. What are you going to analyze, huh? The color of the NPC's hair? Just stay out of my way. Kajiro didn't rise to the bait. Engaging with Shigaraki was strategically pointless. The man's emotional state was a liability, and feeding it would serve no purpose. Instead, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The silence of his response seemed to irritate Shigaraki more than any retort could have. It is time, Kurogiri announced. The edge of the warp gate shimmered, revealing a sliver of bright, artificial light. Let us begin. The world resolved itself with a nauseating lurch. One moment they were in the void, the next they stood on the central plaza of a colossal dome. The unforeseen simulation joint. Kajiro's mind immediately began to process the environment, his eyes scanning every detail with the precision of a targeting computer. Vast interior space, approximately 400 meters in diameter. domed glass ceiling providing natural light. Multiple distinct environmental zones, ruins, landslide, mountain, flood, conflagration. Central Plaza provides a clear line of sight to the entrance and all zones. Strategic choke points at the connecting bridges. Excellent for simulated disaster training. Abysmal for defensive security against a multi-pronged infiltration. As Kurogiri's warp gate expanded, vomiting forth a small army of low-level thugs and villains, Kajiro was already moving, while Shigaraki grandstand, announcing their arrival to the terrified students below. Kajiro used a single-minute burst of his kinetic stockpile. It wasn't an attack, just a whisper of force directed into the soles of his boots. He launched himself upward, a silent gray blur. He landed as softly as a cat on the upper walkway that ringed the facility, his landing cushioned by his quirk absorbing the kinetic energy, adding it to his reserves. He melted into the shadows behind a series of large support pillars, finding a perfect vantage point that overlooked the entire scene. He was invisible. He was an observer. He was Kajiro. Below, the chaos erupted. The two pro-heroes present, Eraserhead and 13, moved to protect the students. 13 began evacuation procedures while Eraserhead, his capture weapon whipping through the air and his eyes glowing a menacing red, leaped into the fray. And Kajiro watched, his mind a cold, analytical engine. Subject Eraserhead. Pro-hero Shota Aizawa. Quirk, Erasure. Negates emitter and transformation type quirks within his line of sight. Weakness. Effectiveness drops when he blinks. Does not work on mutant types. Gives away his target by his gaze. Fighting style is highly efficient, utilizing a capture weapon made of carbon fiber and a special steel alloy. He negates quirks and uses martial arts and the weapon to incapacitate. He is not a frontline brawler. He is a specialist. A predator. He watched Aizawa tear through the cannon fodder villains with a brutal, dispassionate grace. It was a thing of beauty. Aizawa would erase a villain's quirk, bind them with his scarf, and use their own momentum to slam them into another, all in one fluid motion. He was a master of efficiency and applied physics. All for One had taught him that most heroes relied too heavily on their quirks, becoming clumsy and predictable without them. Aizawa was the exception. He was a warrior who used his quirk as just one tool in a much larger arsenal. Kajiro felt a flicker of professional respect. It was the same feeling he used to get when he analyzed a hero's performance for his old notebooks. A cold, intellectual admiration for skill, stripped of any fanboyish devotion. Aizawa was competent. That made him dangerous. But it also made him a fascinating subject. Then his gaze drifted to the students. Class 1A. The cream of the crop, the next generation of the heroes his master sought to dismantle. Kurogiri had used his own quirk to scatter them across the facility, a classic divide-and-conquer strategy. Kajiro's eyes narrowed, and he began to catalog them, his memory cross-referencing the data he had been given on the UA entrance exams. His attention was first drawn to the flood zone. A small group of villains surrounded a boat, but they were being picked off. He saw a flash of green, a long, powerful tongue shooting out to grab a villain and slam him against the side of the ship. Subject, Tsuyu Ajui. Quirk, Frog. Exhibits abilities analogous to a frog, wall clinging, a powerful tongue capable of lifting a person, aquatic camouflage, and secretion of a mild, irritating toxin, highly versatile in an aquatic environment. Her psychological profile suggests a calm, level-headed demeanor. An asset in a crisis. He watched her work with the terrified, purple-haired boy, Mineta, he recalled, whose quirk was laughably absurd, to create a vortex that trapped the remaining villains. It was clever. It was resourceful. It was heroic. The word felt strange in his thoughts, a foreign concept he was supposed to have discarded. Then, his eyes were pulled to the ruins zone. The sound of explosions drew his attention like a magnet. There, amidst the crumbling facades of fake buildings, was a figure he knew better than any other. Subject, Katsuki Bakugo. Quirk, Explosion. Secretes nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms and ignites it to create explosions. High offensive output. Versatile applications include propulsion and stun grenades. Weaknesses. Overuse can cause muscle fatigue, effectiveness reduced in cold environments. Psychological profile, highly aggressive, arrogant, possesses a severe superiority complex. Prone to rage, which can be exploited. However, possesses a high combat IQ and a relentless drive to win. He watched Bakugo blast his way through a group of villains, a wide, predatory grin on his face. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of violence and rage. But he wasn't alone. A boy with spiky red hair and a hardening quirk was fighting back-to-back with him. Eijiro Kirishima. Their teamwork was surprisingly effective. Bakugo's unrestrained offense was covered by Kirishima's formidable defense. Kajiro felt a complex, ugly knot tighten in his gut. It was a phantom ache from a life that was no longer his. He remembered that same explosive power directed at him. The smell of burnt sugar and ozone, the heat of it on his skin, the laughter. He remembered the name Bakugo had given him, Deku. Useless. He flexed his hand, feeling the low, steady hum of his own power. He could crush Bakugo now. The thought was a dark, seductive whisper. He could absorb the force of those explosions until he was a living bomb, and then unleash it all in a single, devastating counterattack. He could show him, once and for all, what useless really looked like. But his orders were clear. Observe. Do not interfere. And beneath the cold satisfaction of that imagined revenge, another, more confusing feeling stirred. Bakugo, for all his monstrous arrogance, was fighting to protect his classmate. He was facing down villains without a hint of fear, his belief in his own victory an unshakable force. It was the same quality that had made him a bully, but here, on this battlefield, twisted into something Kajiro had to grudgingly admit looked a lot like heroism. And Kirishima, with his talk of being manly, and his straightforward, courageous grin, he was the embodiment of the simple, noble ideal Kajiro had once chased. They are children playing dress-up, he told himself, forcing the thought into his mind. They are products of a corrupt system, seeking fame and glory. Master said so, but it didn't look like they were seeking fame. It looked like they were trying to survive. It looked like they were trying to save each other. The dissonance was a low, grating hum in the back of his mind, a bug in his new, clean code. His attention snapped back to the central plaza. The main event was beginning. Aizawa had fought his way to Shigaraki and Kurojiri, but his momentum had finally stalled. He was good, but he was outnumbered, and then, the monster appeared. It was a hulking brute, easily the size of All Might, with dark purple-black skin, an exposed brain, and dead, staring eyes. It was the Nomu. Kajiro leaned forward, his analytical mind captivated. Subject, Nomu. Apparent quirks, shock absorption, super regeneration, super strength. Physical form is heavily mutated. No sign of higher brain function. It is not a person. It is a biological weapon, a purpose-built anti-All Might tool. He watched in cold fascination as the Nomu took one of Aizawa's punches without flinching, then grabbed the hero's arm. The sound of snapping bone echoed across the plaza, sharp and sickeningly clear. The Nomu smashed Aizawa's head into the concrete, again and again. The brutal, mindless violence of it was jarring. The low-level thugs were one thing. This was something else entirely. This was slaughter. Shigaraki cackled, a high, unhinged sound that scraped at Kajiro's nerves. This is our anti-symbol of peace. The high-end, Noma. He's so cool, isn't he? So this is the sledgehammer, Kajiro thought, a sliver of ice in his veins. This is the pure rage Master spoke of. He had read about revolutions in the history books his master had provided. He had read about necessary evils and the hard choices required to forge a new world. But watching the Nomus systematically break a hero, watching Shigaraki clap his hands like a delighted child at a puppet show, this didn't feel like a precise surgical procedure to remove a cancer. It felt like a rabid animal being let off its leash. It was ugly. It was chaotic. It was inefficient. And it was then that Shigaraki noticed the students who had been left at the entrance. Tsuyu Ajiri and the small, purple one, Aizawa, broken and bleeding, had used the last of his strength to erase Shigaraki's quirk just as he touched Ajiri's face. But now, the effect was gone. Aizawa's hair fell. He had been forced to blink. Shigaraki turned his attention to the students, his head tilting. "You were so cool, Eraserhead," he said, his voice a low, scratchy growl. He reached out again, his fingers splayed, aiming for Azuri's face. She was frozen, her wide eyes reflecting the 5 outstretched fingers that would turn her to dust. The boy beside her was paralyzed with terror. No one was close enough to help. Aizawa was broken, the other students were miles away. Time seemed to slow down. Kajiro watched, his mind a whirlwind. His orders were absolute. Do not interfere. Interfering would compromise his position. It would reveal his presence. It would be a direct betrayal of his master's trust. It was illogical. It was a tactical error. Azuri was a future hero, an enemy combatant. Her death was a strategically advantageous outcome. He processed the variables. He calculated the odds. He ran the simulation in his head, and his body moved anyway. It was an instinct, a muscle memory from a former life. The heart of Izuku Midoriya, the boy who ran toward the sludge villain, screamed from beneath the cold, hard shell of Kajiro. It was a rebellion from within. He didn't jump down. He didn't shout. He didn't reveal himself. He simply extended a single finger. The kinetic energy he had stored from his initial leap and from the minor shifts in his position was still humming within him, a low, patient charge. He released the tiniest fraction of it, a burst of force no bigger than a snapped rubber band. He didn't aim it at Shigaraki or Azuri. He aimed it at the ceiling. His target was a shard of glass from the dome, which had been cracked during Kurogiri's initial arrival. The tiny, invisible pulse of kinetic energy shot across the expanse of the USJ and struck the shard. The impact was negligible, but it was just enough to dislodge it from its precarious position in the shattered frame. The piece of glass, about the size of a dinner plate, fell. It spun through the air, catching the light, and shattered on the concrete plaza a few feet to Shigaraki's right. Crash! The sound was sudden and sharp in the tense silence. It was nothing. A random bit of falling debris in a chaotic situation. Plausible deniability, but it was enough. Shigaraki flinched, his head snapping toward the sound, his hand hesitating for a barest fraction of a second. It was an involuntary, animal reaction to a sudden stimulus. A quarter of a second. A half. And in that infinitesimal window of distraction, the doors to the USJ burst open with a deafening boom. He was here. "It's fine now!" A voice boomed, a sound that was once Izuku Midoriya's entire religion. "For I am here!" All Might stood in the doorway, his costume bright and garish against the gloom of the entrance tunnel. He wasn't smiling. His face was a mask of cold, righteous fury. A wave of something complex and overwhelming washed over Kajiro. It was not the worship of his childhood. It was a strange mix of clinical interest, residual resentment, and a profound, undeniable, and deeply shameful sense of relief. He had done it. He had interfered. He had saved her. And no one would ever know. He immediately suppressed the feeling, burying it under layers of cold analysis. Subject, All Might. Arrived later than projected. Appears to be in a state of extreme anger, which is uncharacteristic of his public persona. This suggests an emotional, rather than tactical, response. A potential vulnerability. He watched as All Might moved in a blur, taking out the remaining villains, rescuing Aizawa, and snatching up the students in the path of danger. It was an incredible display of speed and power, but Kajiro could see what others couldn't. He knew about the time limit. He knew about the weakened body beneath the muscle. He saw the slight stiffness in All Might's movements, the almost imperceptible grimace of pain he hid behind his grin. The symbol of peace was a fragile pillar. Just as his master had said, the real fight began. All Might versus the Nomu. It was a titanomachy, a battle of gods that shook the very foundations of the building. Punches that broke the sound barrier echoed like cannon fire. The wind pressure from their blows kicked up clouds of dust. Kajiro's analytical mind was in overdrive. Nomu's shock absorption is negating the worst of All Might's blows. All Might is being forced to use more power, more effort for each attack, accelerating the depletion of his time limit. The regeneration is instantaneous. A perfect counter. Dr. Garaki's work is terrifyingly effective. He saw Shigaraki explaining the Noma's purpose, saw the dawning horror on All Might's face as he realized he couldn't win with brute force. He saw the students, Bakugo and Kirishima among them, rejoining the fray to help their idol. It was foolish. It was reckless. It was brave. He watched Bakugo pin down Kurogiri's physical body, his combat IQ shining as he instantly deduced the villain's weakness. He watched Todoroki, the boy with the ice and fire quirk, immobilize the Noma. He watched them all work together, a flawed but functioning unit, all for the sake of their teacher. This was the lie. This was the contradiction at the heart of All for One's teachings. He had been taught that heroes were selfish, that society was a sham, that teamwork was a facade for personal gain, but what he was witnessing was raw, unadulterated altruism. They were children, risking their lives for one another, for an ideal. The Nomu eventually broke free, its raw power overwhelming the students. And All Might, seeing their courage, made his choice. "You were right, villain!" he roared, his voice resonating with a power that seemed to come from his very soul. "It's true that I am getting weaker. But I can still fight. I can still push beyond my limits." Plus ultra. The UA school motto. A phrase that once gave Izuku Midoriya goosebumps. Kajiro watched, mesmerized, as All Might unleashed a flurry of punches so fast, so powerful, that they defied physics. More than 100%. Each blow was a desperate, self-destructive act of pure will. The Noma's shock absorption was overloaded, its body unable to process the sheer, overwhelming kinetic force. With one final, titanic blow, a plus ultra smash, he sent the Noma flying out of the dome and into the stratosphere. The hero had won. The symbol stood tall, steam rolling off his body. But Kajiro saw the truth. The steam was thicker than it should be. The pose was strained. He was at his limit. A single, solid hit now would be enough to reveal his skeletal form to the world. Shigaraki saw it too. He charged, a last-ditch, desperate attempt to end the game. But then the gunshots rang out. The other pro-heroes had arrived. Snipe's bullets tore through Shigaraki's limbs, incapacitating him. It was over. "You may have defeated my Nomu," Shigaraki shrieked as Kurogiri enveloped him in a warp gate, his voice filled with the rage of a child whose favorite toy had been broken. "But All Might is weakened. The next time we meet, I will kill you." This is just the beginning. They vanished. The battle was done. Kajiro remained in the shadows, his heart a frantic, chaotic drum in his chest. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting data. He had seen the raw, ugly brutality of his new allies. He had seen the selfless, inspiring courage of his old dream. And he had acted against his orders, a single, secret act of rebellion that had changed the outcome of the battle. He had saved Suyu Ajiri. He had given All Might the opening he needed. He felt the terrifying, exhilarating pulse of his old self, a ghost of the hero he had wanted to be. And it disgusted him. It was a weakness. A flaw in his programming. He ruthlessly suppressed it. He waited until the other pros had secured the area and the students were being led away. Then, with the last of his stored kinetic energy, he leaped from his perch, landing silently in the now empty landslide zone. He found a secluded corner, far from any prying eyes, and spoke into a small, subdermal communicator behind his ear. "Kurogiri. I require extraction." The familiar purple mist swirled into existence before him. He stepped through without a word, leaving the ruins of the USJ, and the ruins of his convictions, behind. He stood in the dark, wood-paneled library, the only light coming from the massive screen where his master's dark, enthroned form resided. He had given his report. Subject Bakugo displays a high combat IQ but is tactically predictable due to his over-reliance on offense. Subject Todoroki's quirk offers immense versatility, but he exhibits a psychological reluctance to use his fire abilities, a weakness that could be exploited. Eraserhead's combat effectiveness is extremely high against quirk-reliant individuals but drops significantly in a war of attrition. All Might's power output has degraded by an estimated 15 to 20% since his last public engagement. He was operating at his absolute physical limit by the end of the confrontation. The Noma performed to specifications, successfully pushing the subject past his breaking point. Shigaraki's leadership was, emotionally driven. His presence incited chaos but lacked strategic direction. The report was perfect. It was cold, clinical, and filled with precise, actionable intelligence. It was exactly what his master wanted. He mentioned nothing of the falling glass. Nothing of his intervention. It was a secret he would take to his grave. There was a long silence from the screen. Kajiro stood at perfect attention, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a neutral mask. An excellent report, Kajiro. All for One's voice finally came, dripping with satisfaction. Your analytical skills are precisely as I had hoped. You see the world not as it appears, but as a series of systems to be understood and manipulated. You have done well. Thank you, Master, Kajiro said, his voice betraying no emotion. Tamura is a child, and he behaved as such. All for One continued, a note of disappointment in his tone. But his hatred is a valuable resource. It will be tempered in time. What matters is that the first stone has been thrown. The world has seen that the symbol of peace can bleed. That is a victory in itself. The master paused. You did well to remain unseen. You have proven your discipline. You are ready for the next phase of your development. Kajiro bowed his head. I live to serve your vision, Master. But as he stood there, bathed in the glow of the screen, his mind was not on his master's vision. It was filled with unwanted images. The determined glint in Kirishima's eyes, the terrified, grateful face of Tsuyu Azuri, the unwavering, blood-soaked smile of All Might. He had delivered a perfect report. He had lied perfectly, and deep within the cold, forged shell of the villain known as Kajiro, a single, treasonous seed of doubt had been planted. It was small. It was buried deep in the darkness. But it had begun to grow. The city of Hosu was a symphony of chaos, and Kajiro moved through it like a ghost. Sirens wailed in a constant, overlapping chorus, their desperate cries echoing off the glass and steel canyons of the urban landscape. Plumes of black smoke billowed into the night sky, painting the clouds in hellish shades of orange and gray. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, burned asphalt, and a coppery tang that Kajiro's newly honed senses identified as blood. It was a war zone. And it was, in a word, sloppy. From his vantage point on a narrow rooftop ledge, Kajiro observed the pandemonium with a cold, critical eye. 3 Nomu, cruder and less powerful than the one from the USJ, were rampaging through the main thoroughfare. They were blunt instruments, designed not for a specific tactical objective but for maximum terror. They smashed cars, tore down power lines, and swatted at the handful of pro-heroes attempting to contain them. This was Shigaraki's doing, an act of petty, unfocused vengeance for his humiliation at the USJ. It was a tantrum on a city-wide scale. Kajiro found it distasteful. It was strategically barren, a brute force application of resources that served only to draw the ire of every hero in a 50-mile radius. It was loud, messy, and achingly inefficient. His own mission, assigned directly by All for One, was the antithesis of this chaos. It was a mission of surgical precision. While Tamura is distracting the heroes with his fireworks, you will perform a quiet acquisition for me. His master's voice had instructed him from the familiar screen. There is a low-level villain, a data broker by the name of Morio Tamekase. He operates out of a server farm in the Hosu Industrial District. His quirk, Data Stream, allows him to psionically interface with and absorb information from digital networks. It is a minor but uniquely useful ability that I wish to add to my collection. Kurojiri will provide your insertion point. Acquire the quirk. Eliminate the target. Leave no trace. This is not a battle, Kajiro. It is an extraction, a scalpel's work. While the sledgehammer made a racket across town, Kajiro adjusted the simple black hood that was pulled up over his head, its shadow obscuring the upper half of his face and his domino mask. He wore the same dark, practical gear as before, designed to blend into the urban night. He felt the familiar, low hum of his kinetic stockpile, a baseline charge he built simply by walking and leaping across the rooftops to get to his position. He was a coiled spring, a loaded weapon waiting for a target. His target's server farm was located in a nondescript warehouse 3 blocks away, far from the main chaos. All for One had provided the building's schematics, security codes, and Tamekase's psychological profile. The man was a coward, more likely to flee or bargain than to fight. The mission was, by all accounts, simple. He pushed off from the ledge, his movements fluid and silent. He flowed over the rooftops like a phantom, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the gravel and tar. The city was his playground now, a three-dimensional chessboard he navigated with practiced ease. Each leap, each roll, each controlled drop from one roof to a lower one was a kinetic gift, feeding a little more energy into his internal battery. The charge grew steadily, a warm and reassuring presence in the core of his being. He dropped into the alley behind the Target warehouse, landing in a perfect crouch. The air here was still, the sounds of the distant battle muffled by the brick and concrete. A single, flickering fluorescent light cast long, dancing shadows. He bypassed the electronic lock on the rear door with the codes he memorized, the keypad beeping its polite acceptance. The door clicked open. The inside was a maze of humming server racks, a forest of blinking green and amber lights. The air was cool and smelled of sterilized air and hot electronics. According to the intel, Tamekei's personal office was on the second floor, a mezzanine that overlooked the main floor. Kajiro moved through the server aisles, his senses on high alert. He was halfway across the main floor when a sound stopped him cold. It wasn't the hum of the servers or the distant wail of a siren. It was the scuff of a boot on concrete, coming from the direction of the front-loading bay. It was followed by a low, familiar growl. TCH. Best Jeanist is a real slave driver. Patrol the perimeter, Bakugo. Maintain a professional demeanor, Bakugo. Like I'm some damn rookie. Kajiro froze behind a server rack, every muscle in his body going rigid. That voice. That arrogant, gravelly timbre. It was a sound that was etched into his DNA, a Pavlovian trigger for a decade of fear and humiliation. He didn't need to see the speaker to know who it was. Bakugo. What is he doing here? Kajiro's mind raced, his cold, analytical calm shattered. His internship is with Best Jeanist, whose agency is in Tokyo, not Hosu. Did he get reassigned? Did he disobey orders and come looking for a fight? Variable unaccounted for. Mission parameters compromised. He could retreat. Abort the mission, report the unforeseen complication to his master. It would be the logical, prudent course of action. But something held him in place. A dark, magnetic curiosity, a grim, personal gravity. He peered through a gap between two server racks. And there he was. Katsuki Bakugo, in his full hero costume. The grenade-like gauntlets, the orange X across his chest, the spiked, explosive hair. He looked the same. Exactly the same. Brimming with the same furious, incandescent arrogance as he always had. He was kicking impatiently at a loose bit of concrete on the floor. Stupid city's falling apart, and I'm stuck on guard duty for some stupid warehouse full of computers. Bakugo muttered, his gaze sweeping the darkened room. Kajiro's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. This was not the detached observation of the USJ. This was different. This was visceral. This was personal. The boy who had made his life a living hell, the catalyst for 1,000 nights of tear-soaked pillows, the one who had told him to take a swan dive off a roof, was standing less than 30 feet away. And for the first time, Kajiro felt a genuine, murderous rage. It was a hot, black emotion, utterly at odds with the cold, logical persona he had so carefully constructed. It was the ghost of Izuku Midoriya, not screaming in fear, but screaming for vengeance. Bakugo's head suddenly snapped up, his crimson eyes narrowing. His senses, honed by countless battles, had picked up something. A flicker of movement? A shift in the air? Kajiro cursed himself internally. His emotional spike had caused a momentary lapse in his control, a subtle change in his posture. It was all Bakugo needed. Who's there? Bakugo barked, his hands coming up, his palms already starting to crackle with tiny, ominous explosions. Show yourself, you damn coward! Kajiro took a deep, steadying breath, forcing the rage down, compressing it into a cold, hard diamond of intent. Retreat was no longer an option. He had been detected. The mission had changed. He would have to neutralize the threat. He stepped out from behind the server rack, his movements slow and deliberate. He kept his hood up, his face cloaked in shadow. He didn't speak. He just stood there, a silent, gray figure against the blinking lights of the servers. Bakugo's eyes widened for a split second in surprise, then narrowed into furious slits. A villain, huh? Finally, some action! You picked the wrong damn warehouse to rob, you hear me? Without any further warning, Bakugo blasted off, his right hand aimed forward, his left back, propelling him across the floor in a controlled explosion. He was a human missile, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. Die! He screamed, his signature battle cry. The old Izuku would have flinched, cowered, thrown his arms up in a pathetic attempt to shield himself. Kajiro did not. He stood his ground, his feet planted. He saw the attack coming not as a terrifying explosion, but as a gift of pure kinetic energy. He brought his arms up, not in a block, but with his palms open, as if to welcome it. Boom! The explosion engulfed him. The force was immense, a physical blow that would have sent a normal person flying. The heat was scorching. But as the smoke and fire washed over him, Kajiro's quirk drank it in. The concussive force, the raw kinetic energy of the blast, was siphoned into his body, feeding his stockpile. The hum inside him roared to life, a hungry furnace being fed a stream of pure fuel. The smoke cleared. Kajiro was still standing in the exact same spot, his arms slightly blackened but otherwise unharmed. He had absorbed the entirety of the attack. Bakugo's jaw dropped. He stared, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. His explosions always worked. They always had an effect. But this was like punching water. What the? Bakugo stammered, his arrogance momentarily replaced by genuine confusion. What's your quirk? Some kind of nullification? Kajiro still didn't speak. He slowly lowered his arms, flexing his fingers. The power thrumming through his veins was exquisite. It was Bakugo's own power, refined, stored, and ready to be turned back on its sender. The silence, the utter lack of reaction, infuriated Bakugo. Don't ignore me, you damn extra! He roared, launching himself forward again, this time unleashing a rapid-fire series of smaller, more focused blasts from both hands. AP shot. Kajiro moved. He was a blur of gray, flowing around the attacks. He didn't need to absorb them now. He had enough. He dodged and weaved, his movements economical and precise. He saw every blast before it was even fully formed, predicting the trajectory from the angle of Bakugo's shoulders, the tension in his arms. He was analyzing, just like he always had, but now his body could keep up with his brain. Hold still! Bakugo bellowed, his frustration mounting. His attacks became wilder, more powerful. He was like a raging bull, and Kajiro was the matador, effortlessly sidestepping each charge. Finally, Kajiro saw his opening. Bakugo overextended on a wide, sweeping right-handed explosion, leaving his left side exposed for a fraction of a second. Kajiro closed the distance. He didn't throw a punch. He simply placed his open palm against Bakugo's chest, and he released. It wasn't a massive burst. It was a small, focused, precisely calculated amount of the energy he had absorbed. It was the kinetic equivalent of Bakugo's own first explosion, concentrated into a single point. The effect was devastating. There was no fire, no sound of an explosion. Just a dull, solid thump. Bakugo's eyes went wide as the force hit him like a freight train. The air was driven from his lungs in a sharp gasp. He was lifted off his feet and sent flying backward, tumbling end over end until he crashed into a stack of empty metal shelving with a deafening clang of tortured metal. He slumped to the ground, dazed and gasping for air, the shelves collapsing around him. Kajiro stood over him, a silent specter in the dim light. He could feel Bakugo's shock, his disbelief. It was a more satisfying feeling than any rage-fueled punch could ever be. He had beaten him, not with overwhelming power, but with superior strategy. He had used Bakugo's own strength, his own defining feature, as the weapon of his defeat. Bakugo struggled to his hands and knees, coughing. Who the hell are you? He wheezed, shaking his head to clear it. He looked up, his furious crimson eyes trying to pierce the shadows of Kajiro's hood. It was then that he saw it. Not a face, not a feature, but something in the way the figure stood. A subtle, almost imperceptible hint of a familiar posture. a ghost of a memory, and the eyes barely visible in the gloom. There was something hauntingly familiar about their shape. His mind, which had been focused on combat, suddenly made a series of impossible connections. The quirkless kid who was always muttering and analyzing. The last time he'd seen him, on the day of the sludge villain incident. The way he had simply vanished. No one at Aldera Middle had seen him since. His own mother had mentioned that Inko Midoriya had been beside herself with worry for a few days before she, too, had suddenly and quietly moved away. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture so ludicrous, so utterly insane, that he almost dismissed it. But the evidence was standing right in front of him. "No," Bakugo whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "It can't be. You're supposed to be quirkless." He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly, his gaze locked on the figure before him. Deku? The name echoed in the cavernous space. The brand. The curse. The name he had buried 6 months ago. Hearing it from Bakugo's lips here, now, after everything, it broke through Kajiro's carefully constructed control. The cold diamond of his rage cracked, and the white-hot fury within erupted. He moved, faster than Bakugo could track. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, grabbed Bakugo by the front of his costume, and slammed him against the solid steel frame of a server rack. The impact rattled the entire aisle. Kajiro leaned in close, his face just inches from Bakugo's, the shadows of his hood finally falling away in the dim light. For the first time, Bakugo saw his face clearly. It was him. It was Izuku Midoriya, but it wasn't. The freckles were the same, the shock of green-black hair was the same. But the face was leaner, harder. The jaw was set, and the eyes, the wide, fearful, worshipping eyes he had tormented for a decade were gone. In their place was a cold, green fire. A terrifying, bottomless well of controlled loathing. This was not Deku. This was a predator. "Don't!" Kajiro snarled, his voice a low, dangerous rasp that was completely alien to Bakugo's ears. "You will not call me that name! Ever again!" Bakugo's shock gave way to a fresh wave of defiant fury. "It is you! What the hell is this, Deku? What's with the stupid costume? And that quirk? You were lying all this time? You were looking down on me, you bastard?" Kajiro's grip tightened, his knuckles straining. The sheer, unadulterated ego of the boy was breathtaking. Even now, faced with undeniable proof that his entire worldview was wrong, Bakugo's first assumption was that he had been deceived, that he was the victim. A bitter, broken laugh escaped Kajiro's lips. It was a horrible sound, filled with 6 months of indoctrination and a lifetime of pain. "Lying?" Kajiro repeated, his voice dripping with venom. "You think this is a lie? No, Kaken. This is the truth. The truth is that the world you believe in is a lie." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're still trying to be a hero, Kaken? After all this? You, with your anger and your ego, you think you can save people? All you know how to do is break things. People included." He shoved Bakugo back against the rack again for emphasis. "You worship All Might. A man who smiles for the cameras while the society he's sworn to protect rots from the inside out. A man who stands on a pillar of hypocrisy and tells a desperate, broken kid that his dreams are impossible. Is that your idea of a hero? Is that the pinnacle of justice you're chasing?" Every word was a poisoned dart, aimed at the very core of Bakugo's identity. Kajiro was using the deconstructionist logic that All for One had taught him, but he was infusing it with a decade of personal, venomous resentment. Bakugo was speechless. He was trying to process the quirk, the new personality, the insane, blasphemous words his former victim was spewing. It was too much. His world was tilting on its axis. You're a villain!" Bakugo finally managed to choke out, the words tasting like acid. "Am I?" Kajiro tilted his head, a gesture of pure, cold curiosity. "Or am I just the one who is willing to open his eyes? You call me a villain because I won't play by the rules of a broken game, a game where people like me are told we're worthless, and people like you are praised for having the good luck to be born with a powerful quirk. I'm not trying to be a hero anymore, Kaken. I'm trying to do what the heroes can't. I'm trying to fix things." He saw the confusion warring with the rage in Bakugo's eyes. He had planted a seed of doubt, a sliver of his master's poisonous philosophy, right into the heart of his old tormentor. It was a victory more profound than simply winning the fight. His internal chronometer told him he had been in here too long. The pro-heroes would be sweeping the area soon. His primary mission was still incomplete. He had to go. He let go of Bakugo's costume, shoving him back one last time. Bakugo stumbled but caught his balance, his body tense, ready to fight again despite his confusion. "This isn't over, Deku!" Bakugo growled, his voice low and dangerous. Kajiro gave him a final, withering look. A look that said, "You are beneath my notice." "No," Kajiro said, his voice returning to its cold, emotionless state. "It is." He took a step back, and with a final, powerful burst of his stored kinetic energy, he launched himself straight up. He crashed through the corrugated metal ceiling of the warehouse as if it were tissue paper, the sound of tearing metal echoing in the night. He landed on the roof, the impact of his landing replenishing a fraction of the energy he just spent. He glanced down through the hole he had created. Bakugo was staring up at him, his face a mask of shock, fury, and something Kajiro had never seen there before, profound, world-shattering confusion. Then, Kajiro was gone, melting back into the shadows of the Hosu rooftops, leaving a bewildered, furious, and deeply unsettled Katsuki Bakugo alone in a wrecked warehouse with the ghost of the boy he thought he knew. Kajiro ran, his heart still pounding, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly beginning to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He had failed his mission. He had engaged a hero. He had revealed his identity. He had let his personal feelings compromise his objective. He had broken every rule. He would have to report this to his master. The consequences would be severe, but as he leaped from one roof to the next, a single, triumphant, and terrifying thought cut through his fear of punishment. I broke him. He hadn't just defeated Bakugo physically. He had shattered his reality. He had taken the solid, black and white world of heroes and villains that Bakugo lived in and had fractured it into a million shades of gray. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one who was weak and confused. He wasn't the one left behind. He had become the monster that haunted someone else's dreams. And the feeling, dark and terrible as it was undeniably empowering. The forging of Kajiro was more complete now than ever before. But the fire that had completed it was not his master's cold logic, but the white-hot, personal flame of his own past. The silence in the library was not the comforting, scholarly quiet Kajiro had grown accustomed to. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of judgment. It pressed in on him from all sides, amplifying the sound of his own heartbeat, which thrummed a nervous, unsteady rhythm in his ears. He stood at perfect attention in the center of the room, his eyes fixed on the massive, dark screen where the inert, shadowed form of his master resided. He had returned from Hosu 2 hours ago. After his confrontation with Bakugo, he had methodically completed his mission. He had found the terrified data broker, Morio Tenkei's, cowering in a server closet. The man had babbled, offering money, information, anything to be spared. Kajiro had felt nothing. He had simply placed a hand on the man's forehead, following the procedure Dr. Garaki had taught him for preparing a target for quirk extraction. Then, he had administered a lethal, fast-acting neurotoxin with a spring-loaded injector pen. It was clean, silent, and efficient. He had left no trace. He had reported his success to Kurojiri, who had then warped the unconscious data broker to one of Dr. Garaki's labs. But Kajiro had also reported his failure. Every detail. The unforeseen presence of Katsuki Bakugo. The confrontation. The fight. The revelation of his identity. The emotional outburst. He had omitted nothing, because he knew his master would see through any lie. To lie would be a greater sin than to fail, so he waited for his sentence. He had disobeyed a direct order. He had allowed personal history to compromise a mission. He had exposed a valuable asset, himself, to an enemy. He anticipated punishment, reconditioning. Perhaps the painful removal of his quirk as a lesson in humility. The possibilities were endless and terrifying. Finally, the screen flickered to life. The familiar, deep baritone of All for One filled the room, but it lacked its usual warmth and patience. It was cold, flat, and resonant with an ancient, terrifying power. Kajiro. The single word was an indictment. Master, Kajiro replied, his voice a perfectly controlled monotone. He bowed his head. I have failed you. I accept the consequences. There was a long, drawn-out silence. Kajiro could feel his master's unseen gaze dissecting him, peeling back the layers of his new persona and examining the frightened, flawed boy still cowering within. You believe you failed? All for one stated. It was not a question. I was compromised by emotion. I engaged an enemy unnecessarily. I revealed my identity. These are the actions of an amateur, not a precision instrument. He recited his own failings like a catechism, a verbal self-flagellation. Yes, the voice from the screen agreed, the coldness unwavering. Your actions were emotional. They were impulsive. They were a direct violation of my instructions. In a purely tactical sense, you failed spectacularly. Kajiro braced himself. However, the voice continued, a new, complex note entering its tone. It was the sound of a grandmaster watching a novice make a clumsy move that accidentally puts the king in check. The outcome of your failure is intriguing. Kajiro slowly raised his head, confusion flickering across his features. You did not simply defeat the Bakugo boy physically. All for one mused, the sound of his respirator a soft, rhythmic hiss in the background. You shattered his ideological foundation. You took the simplistic, black and white world of a promising young hero, and you poisoned it with doubt, with moral ambiguity. You planted a seed of my philosophy in the mind of one of All Might's most fervent disciples. You did not use my logic as a detached academic argument. You weaponized it with your own personal history. It was a raw, brutally effective act of psychological warfare. The master paused. This is a result I had not anticipated. And I find it deeply pleasing. You have inadvertently demonstrated a capacity for a different kind of warfare, one that I had not yet begun to teach you. You have shown me that you are not merely a scalpel. You have the potential to be a subtle, insidious poison as well. The relief that washed over Kajiro was so profound it almost buckled his knees. He was not going to be punished. He was being praised? For his failure? The paradox was dizzying. The exposure of your identity is a complication, of course. All for one continued, his tone shifting back to business. But a manageable one. The boy has no proof. Who would believe him, that a quirkless, forgotten child has returned as a powerful, eloquent saboteur? They will assume he is lying, or traumatized, or perhaps even a traitor himself. His frustration and his inability to make anyone believe him will only serve to isolate him further, making him more susceptible to the very doubts you have planted. Your mistake has created a unique, long-term opportunity. Kajiro's mind reeled as he processed his master's perspective. He was seeing the event not as a linear failure, but as a complex web of cause and effect, of ripples spreading out from a single stone tossed in the water. All for one didn't just play chess. He played with the board, the pieces, and the players all at once. You have proven to me that you are ready for the next stage of your development, the master declared. Your first quirk, kinetic stockpile, rewards patience and defense. It is the quirk of an observer, but you are no longer just an observer. It is time you were given a more proactive tool. A means to impose your will upon the world, not just react to it. The screen behind All for One shifted, displaying a new image. It was a complex diagram of a human nervous system, with glowing pathways illustrating a quirk factor's integration. Dr. Garaki has prepared your next gift, All for One said. It is a quirk I acquired from a demolition worker some years ago. It is simple, powerful, and synergizes perfectly with your existing ability. We are calling it Impact Reverb. Kajiro's analytical mind immediately engaged, his own personal failure forgotten in the face of this new, fascinating data. With it, any surface you make physical contact with, you can send a powerful shockwave rippling through it. The strength, range, and frequency of these shockwaves will be directly proportional to the amount of kinetic energy you have stored. At a low charge, you can create a subtle tremor to destabilize an opponent's footing. At a high charge, you could turn this entire building to dust. Kajiro's eyes widened. He imagined the applications. He could shatter walls, create earthquakes, turn the very ground beneath his enemy's feet into a weapon. He could send a concussive blast through a hero's shield, bypassing their defense entirely. Combined with kinetic stockpile, it was a devastating 1-2 punch. He could absorb an enemy's attack and use that very same energy to tear their world apart. A true savior needs more than one tool to solve the world's problems. All for One said, his voice now filled with the familiar, paternal warmth Kajiro had come to crave. You have a shield. Now I am giving you a sword. Go to Dr. Garaki. Your next evolution awaits. The screen went dark. Kajiro stood alone in the silence, his mind buzzing. He had not been punished, he had been rewarded. His mistake had been reframed as an unexpected success. His master's genius was in his ability to turn any variable, even failure, to his advantage. The indoctrination settled deeper, the chains of loyalty and admiration wrapping tighter around Kajiro's soul. His master was infallible. To serve him was to serve the inevitable tide of history. The second procedure was just as agonizing as the first. The searing pain, the cellular rebellion, the fever that felt like his blood was boiling. But this time, it was different. He was not a terrified, quirkless boy clinging to a desperate hope. He was Kajiro, and he understood that this pain was the price of power. It was the pain of becoming more. When he awoke in the sterile white room, he felt the change immediately. Beneath the familiar, thrumming hum of his kinetic stockpile, there was a new sensation. It was a low, resonant frequency, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the palms of his hands and the soles of his feet. It was a sleeping giant, waiting for his command. He spent the next few weeks in the training hall, mastering his new ability. He learned to control the reverb, to modulate its intensity. He practiced sending a fine, sharp tremor through a pane of glass to shatter it, and a broad, rolling wave through a concrete slab to pulverize it. He learned to channel it through his feet, turning the floor into a trap. He learned to combine it with his martial arts, each parry and block not only absorbing energy but also sending a debilitating shockwave back into his opponent's limbs. He was no longer just a reactive fighter. He was an engine of destruction. The name Kajiro, the heat haze, seemed less fitting now. He was becoming an earthquake. It was after he had demonstrated sufficient control of his new quirk that All for One deemed him ready for the final stage of his integration. You have been isolated for your own protection and development, his master's voice explained. You have been my private project, but to be a truly effective instrument of change, you cannot remain in the shadows forever. You must understand all the tools at my disposal. And my most important tool is my successor. It is time you were formally introduced to Tamura Shigaraki. A knot of apprehension tightened in Kajiro's stomach. His observations at the USJ and the fragmented information he'd gleaned from Dr. Garaki had painted a picture of Shigaraki as an unstable, violent man-child. He was the sledgehammer. Kajiro was the scalpel. The two were not designed to work in concert. But an order was an order. Kurojairi appeared in his room that evening. The master has requested your presence. Shigaraki-sama is waiting. The term sama, a suffix of great respect, sounded absurd when attached to Shigaraki's name, but Kurojairi's misty form betrayed no irony. Kajiro simply nodded and followed him. The warp gate opened not into the library or the training hall, but into a place Kajiro had only seen on surveillance footage, the League of Villains bar hideout. The place was a dingy, dimly lit dive. The air was stale, smelling of cheap whiskey and dust. Empty glasses littered the bar, and a small, flickering television in the corner played a silent, grainy news report. The contrast between this squalor and the clean, sterile, high-tech environment where Kajiro had been forged was jarring. This felt like a place for common criminals, not for the architects of a new world order. Shigaraki was hunched over the bar, a controller in his hands, furiously playing a handheld video game. The disembodied hand was still on his face, and his shoulders were tense, his entire posture radiating a hostile, defensive energy. He didn't look up as they entered. What do you want, Kurojairi? He rasped, his eyes glued to the tiny screen. I'm busy grinding for loot. This boss is a real pain, Tamura Shigaraki. Kurojairi announced, his voice formal. Master has sent Kajiro. He is to be integrated into our operations going forward. At the mention of Kajiro's name, Shigaraki's head snapped up. The game was instantly forgotten, dropped onto the bar with a clatter. His crimson eyes, visible through the gaps in the hand mask, fixed on Kajiro with an immediate, palpable hostility. It was the look of a territorial animal sizing up a rival. "Oh," Shigaraki said, his voice a low, scratchy purr of pure malice. "It's Sensei's little pet. The one who's too good to get his hands dirty. The observer." He practically spat the last word. Kajiro met his gaze, his own expression neutral. He gave a slight, formal bow. "It is an honor to meet the one our master has chosen as his successor." His words were polite, but his tone was as cold and sterile as the lab he was born in. Shigaraki let out a dry, rasping laugh. "Don't give me that crap. I know what you are. You're his backup. His pet project. The spare, in case the heir doesn't work out." He stood up, slowly stalking toward Kajiro. He was taller than Kajiro, but his hunched posture and scrawny frame made him seem less imposing. He was all sharp angles and nervous energy. "Sensei tells me you're smart," Shigaraki continued, circling him like a shark. "That you've got a big brain. He gives you fancy new quirks. He gives you special missions. What makes you so special, huh? Is it because you don't have to deal with the annoying NPCs? Because you just get to sit back and watch while I do all the real work?" The jealousy was rolling off him in waves. It was so potent, so childish, that Kajiro almost felt a flicker of pity. Almost. "My purpose is to serve the master's will, the same as yours," Kajiro stated calmly, refusing to be drawn into the emotional storm. "My missions are different, but our ultimate objective is the same." "Our objective?" Shigaraki stopped in front of him, his face just inches away. Kajiro could smell the sour, unwashed scent of him. "You don't know the first thing about our objective. You think this is some big brain, 4D chess game? You think we're building a new world? No. We're here to destroy the old one. We're here to make it all go away. To watch it all crumble to dust. Because it's a stupid, unfair game with terrible lag and overpowered final bosses." His voice had risen to a fever pitch, his eyes wild with a nihilistic glee. Kajiro's blood ran cold. This wasn't the sanitized, intellectual revolution his master had described. This was not a surgeon excising a cancer. This was a pyromaniac who wanted to burn down the entire hospital. The discrepancy was staggering. A chasm had opened up between the ideology he had been fed and the reality that was standing in front of him, scratching furiously at its own neck. Master called him a tool, Kajiro reminded himself. A sledgehammer. His rage is being directed. This is just the raw material. It will be shaped. The thought was a lifeline, a piece of logic to cling to in this sea of chaotic emotion. "I see," Kajiro said, his voice carefully neutral. His lack of reaction seemed to infuriate Shigaraki even more. The villain's hand, all 5 fingers outstretched, shot out, stopping just a millimeter from Kajiro's face. "I am the successor," Shigaraki hissed, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I am the next symbol of fear. You are just a tool. A piece of gear Sensei picked up. Don't you ever forget your place. If you get in my way, if you make me look bad in front of Sensei, I will turn you into a pile of dust so small that even Kurojiri won't be able to find all the pieces. Do you understand, NPC?" The threat was absolute. The killing intent was real. Kajiro felt the low hum of his kinetic stockpile intensify, a purely reflexive defensive reaction. He could end this now. A single, focused burst of impact reverb through the floorboards would be enough to shatter Shigaraki's legs. It would be easy, but that wasn't his purpose. His purpose was to integrate, to understand. And he was beginning to understand all too well. He was the scalpel, designed for precision, logic, and a higher purpose. Shigaraki was the sledgehammer, a weapon of pure, unadulterated destruction, fueled by childish rage and a deep-seated hatred for the world. They were not allies. They were not comrades. They were 2 fundamentally different weapons, forged in the same fire for the same master, but designed for utterly incompatible tasks. And the master had just locked them both in the same armory. Kajiro held Shigaraki's gaze for a long moment, a silent battle of wills fought in the grimy, smoke-filled air. Then, he gave another slight, formal bow. Your position is understood, Shigaraki-sama, he said. The use of the honorific was like a splash of cold water. It was a concession, an acknowledgement of the hierarchy, but his cold, detached tone stripped it of any genuine respect. It was the compliance of a machine, not a subordinate. Shigaraki seemed momentarily thrown off balance. He stared for another second, then let out a frustrated "TCH!" and retracted his hand. He stalked back to the bar, snatched up his game, and threw himself back onto the stool, immediately immersing himself in his digital world, the tense confrontation apparently forgotten. Kurojairi, who had been watching the entire exchange with the impassive silence of a statue, glided forward. Your quarters have been prepared here, Kajiro, he said, his voice betraying nothing. Master believes it is important for you to acclimate to the League's environment. Kajiro's heart sank. He was to stay here? In this den of squalor and instability? The thought was deeply repellent. His clean, white, orderly world had been invaded by the grime and chaos of Shigaraki's reality. But he simply nodded. I understand. As Kurojairi led him to a small, Spartan room in the back, Kajiro's mind was racing. He began to cross-reference, to analyze this new, disturbing data. Shigaraki's nihilism. The Nomu, the failed vessels, Dr. Garaki had mentioned. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and it was not the noble, revolutionary image his master had so carefully painted for him. He felt like a scholar who had studied the beautiful, elegant theories of physics his entire life, only to be confronted with the raw, brutal, and unpredictable chaos of a black hole. The theory was clean. The reality was a monster that devoured everything it touched. He sat on the edge of the simple cot in his new room, the sounds of Shigaraki's video game a faint, irritating buzz through the wall. He looked at his hands, the hands that now wielded two powerful quirks. He was a tool. His master had told him so. A very special, very valuable tool. But as he listened to the angry muttering of the League's leader next door, a chilling new question began to form in his hyper-analytical mind. What is the ultimate purpose of a tool? The answer was simple. A tool is used to build something. And then, when the building is finished, or when a better tool is found, it is put back in the box. Or it is discarded. For the first time since he had stepped into that black car 6 months ago, Kajiro felt a flicker of genuine fear. Not of punishment, not of pain, but of his own obsolescence. He was a piece on his master's board, a very powerful piece. But he was not, and would never be, the player.